Good morning, everybody. My name is Renee Adams. I'm a descendant of the Khoisan people of Southern Africa, so Mongwene to all of you. The city of Halifax is situated on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and traditional land of the Mi'kmaq people. Welcome to Designing for Equity and Homelessness Solutions. How can your community develop lived experience circles and allocate resources for the community-wide benefit? During this session, presentations will highlight the importance of centering humanity and equity in designing programs and policies, and redesigning processes for engaging people with lived experience. You will gain new tools and demystify the homelessness system and tips for monitoring local efforts to realize the right to housing. Our presenters today are Nicole Joseph, Tamer McLetter. Sam Blondeau could not be with us today, and Annika Kirk, and I'm missing a name here. Sean?
Sean can't be with us today.
Okay, and Carrie. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be speaking on designing for equity and specifically centering lived experience in coordinated access system transformation. And so, as she said, my name is Nicole Thomas, and I work at Homebase, which is a technical assistance provider in California. Or I do a lot of work based in California, but we're a national TA provider. And then my co-presenter, who isn't here in person, but she will be watching virtually, and we have some audio files we'll be playing from her, is Deborah Townley, and she's really the star of this presentation. So she is a member of Lived Experience in the community, and her leadership and thought partnership has been just so monumental in a lot of projects I've been lucky enough to work with her on, but specifically today we're going to be talking about coordinated access system redesign. So I will let Deborah start.
Imagine with me for a moment that we are on the great sinking ship, the Titanic. The ship is steadily going under. Rescue ships are coming, but the ship will sink and people will die before a full rescue can be attempted. If affordable housing is the Titanic, the VI SPDAT is the triage tool that decides who gets a seat on a lifeboat. There aren't enough lifeboats. So back then, the law of the sea would dictate that it's women and children first. While this is essentially the same reality we're facing with the housing crisis today, it isn't just women and children who are our most vulnerable. Who is it? Who do we prioritize? In the interest of fairness and integrity, we set our sails to find out. Today we're going to share about that process. Who do we consult, and how do we go about it?
Okay, so as Deborah noted, in this community in California, so again, Santa Clara County, it was, I think, a few years coming where we kind of knew the assessment tool that we use to prioritize housing openings, the VI SPDAT, needed to be phased out in the community. There were national and local reports coming out really underscoring racial inequity implications. We had done coordinated access evaluations and heard really strongly and loudly from the community that the questions were invasive and traumatizing and didn't necessarily, there wasn't the transparency on answering all of these questions, getting them any closer to housing opportunities. And so we kind of knew we needed to phase it out. But around 2 years ago, when we thought, okay, if not the VI SPDAT, what? There weren't very many answers. And communities that were trying to figure it out weren't very comparable to a community like Santa Clara County in terms of scale and size. So smaller communities might have had some success. But I think ultimately, much to the credit of the county and the Office of Supportive Housing in Santa Clara County, they realized just because this is a daunting task and we don't know how doesn't mean we can keep putting it off and not try to figure it out. So this word cloud is an actual word cloud where we had a public coordinated access work group meeting, and we asked folks, you know, if we're redesigning and if you had to design a new assessment on your own, a new system on your own, whom would you prioritize for the next housing opening? And I think fairly and understandably so. We had a lot of advocates at the table, and they were really vouching for the subpopulations that they serve. But we were kind of spinning our wheels and going around in circles because everyone wanted to prioritize, as I said, the communities that they're really strongly advocating for. And so ultimately, the Office of Supportive Housing in the county decided who better to be redesigning the system, really shaping what guiding principles and vision for a new system would look like than the people closest and most impacted by the system. So really, we should be having folks with lived experience define what vulnerability is and really be exploring how we want to reprioritize. And so we set about recruiting a prioritization committee, which was a group of 10 to 12 individuals with lived experience of homelessness. And with this diversity mechanism, we're just trying to show that we really wanted this group of folks to be representative of the multitude of experiences of those experiencing homelessness in Santa Clara County. So these are some of the identities we were really hoping to recruit. And one thing I just want to note with this sign-up sheet is we shared this opportunity across 2 really large community listservs that have like a combined reach of 3,000 individuals. And in our community, we do have a very robust lived experience advisory board whom we often defer to and look for guidance when we're thinking about improving systems. And some members of the LEAB were a part of this prioritization committee, but it was really important for us to cast our net wider and recruit beyond that because we really want to challenge who we think is worthy or valued in terms of uplifting voices, and we don't want to be cherry picking. So they are an incredible asset to us, but we also want to be making sure that we're uplifting other voices that may not be as engaged in systems. And oftentimes with really robust lived experience boards, folks, they might have experience of homelessness that's a little, or housing insecurity that's a little further out, and we wanted to make sure we were also hearing the voices of people whose experiences were more recent, they might be currently unhoused, and some of those pain points with the coordinated access system were very fresh for them. So the last thing I'll point out with this recruitment is we tried out something that we don't always do, which is we had an option where the community could nominate someone else. So on their behalf, they could nominate someone. And this was really utilized for this recruitment effort. We had a lot of community members, a lot of case managers and service providers nominating some of their clients. And that allowed us to reach people we had never previously engaged before, and their perspective and thought partnership was invaluable to us. But what that also meant is we did a lot of follow-up after this recruitment. We received so much interest, and we really made sure to take the time to text, call people, email them, to make sure this was the right opportunity for them, especially if someone else was nominating them. We wanted to make sure that they understood what this opportunity was about and clarify that this wasn't an employment opportunity, because sometimes things just get lost in relaying messaging. So we wanted to make sure to let them know, yes, this is a compensated opportunity, but it's not employment. And so we then recruited our 10 to 12 individuals, and they met weekly, and they had 10 weekly meetings, 1 ad hoc meeting, and it culminated in a half-day retreat. And over the course of these meetings, they built community. So this was largely a group of folks who had not previously met each other. And so building that shared trust and really spending time on human connection was really important, because we knew that this was a really daunting and overwhelming task, and that was only going to be successful if folks had a shared sense of we're all in this together and we understand where people are coming from, even when we have differences of opinions. We, through the course of the meetings, had our community members gain an understanding of coordinated entry. So I think a lot of our PC members were coming in with very strong impassioned feelings of anger, of maybe not feeling heard or dismissed previously. And we really wanted to be making a space for people to critique and challenge coordinated access or coordinated entry. But also we wanted to be making sure that they were fully informed of how the system was working so that they could critique it. So there was a lot of clearing up some misconceptions as well. We reviewed hypothetical prioritization scenarios. identified value statements and came to consensus on those values, and then discussed how to be better incorporating client choice into coordinated access. And what I really want to underscore here is all while continuously acknowledging that this work is extraordinarily difficult. So I said that they reviewed hypothetical prioritization scenarios, except they weren't hypothetical. Like they felt, this was not an abstract thought exercise for them. The implications of redesign and prioritization schemes are very real for them, and they held that with so much intentionality and heart. So, as I said, with inclusivity, we spent a lot of time on recruitment and wanted to make sure we were recruiting people of diverse experiences, including a good number of folks who were currently experiencing homelessness and were unsheltered. And so we wanted to make sure that regardless of their experiences, they were able to show up fully and participate. So some of that looked like making sure we had hybrid meeting options to accommodate folks who wanted to meet in person because that human connection or because of tech reasons was really important to them, and also balance that with folks who wanted to meet virtually. We had a monolingual Spanish speaker, and it was really important to us that we get the perspective of the unique challenges faced by mixed status households. So we really wanted to make sure that we had sufficient translated materials and then the interpretive services to support that. I think this piece in particular, we have a lot of lessons learned, and we can continue to improve on that. And in the Q&A, if folks have specific questions around that, I'm happy to speak to it further. With the Zoom breakout rooms, we had folks who were so passionate about this, and we really needed to explore and revisit equitable facilitation structures, and we really utilized Zoom breakout rooms to have smaller group discussions to make sure everyone's voice was heard. Because in big group meetings, when people have strong feelings, some voices can dominate, and so we wanted to make sure we were providing ample opportunity for everyone. And then there was a lot of follow-up in between meetings just to make sure that folks felt supported throughout. So as I said, it's really important for us to be compensating the work of folks with lived experience because they are bringing expertise to the table. And so we made sure that all PC members were promptly compensated for their time, so they received gift cards on a weekly basis. And we really wanted to make sure that the gift card options were provided depending on the need. So for some of our members, having a gift card option that allowed them to buy gas was like their number one priority. Other people wanted a Visa gift card, and we wanted to meet them where they were at and what was most needed for them. And so while I said, kind of going back to that prompt piece, that they were getting their gift cards on a weekly basis, we did have a couple of members who wanted kind of grouped or like a aggregated payment at the end for a larger gift card amount, and so we accommodated that as well. Okay, now you're going to be hearing from Deborah again.
Flexibility was important for the process and allowed room for some highly emotional and triggered conversations. They did come up. After all, committee members were showing up from current homeless situations. Some were in recovery from homelessness, some lived in vehicles, some were at shelters. The stress level inside living the lived experience is already extremely high. And for some of us, it was the first time we had been able to air our grievances about the lack of housing, the long wait, having to bear witness to the suffering and death around us, while knowing our time could also come before we get help. I'd like to point out how fair, compassionate, and kind my peers were in grappling with the idea that others may go before them, while also being desperate for housing themselves.
So I'm just going to add a couple of things on this slide. I think this redesign process was a huge pivot from starting off with, okay, we will be soliciting the feedback of advocates and system partners to saying, no, let's pause and recruit a committee entirely comprised of folks with lived experience to guide this visioning process. And once the county decided that was the direction they were going to take, much to their credit, I think they also realized we need to revisit what we think a realistic and feasible timeline is for this. And so we've revised our timeline, I think like no less than 3 times, but with a lot of grace from the community and recognizing it is more important to do this right than to rush the process. And I think there have been a couple of presentations at this conference that use the phrase, like, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And these are such important conversations to be had that they just can't afford to be rushed. And then on our end, with Homebase being neutral facilitators, we really needed to recognize, like, for a lot of us, this was the first time we were embarking on this together with the community, especially of this size. And so it was a lot of flexibility and a lot of going back to the drawing board and revisiting, okay, maybe this wasn't the right approach. Okay, thank you. Maybe this wasn't the right approach. How do we pivot? How do we address the current needs? So a lot of flexibility required in that regard. So I'm just going to highlight 2 facilitation structures that we used in some meetings, and then we have a slide with more resources if you'd like to look at that later on. But our very first meeting with the prioritization committee, we didn't talk about any like substantive content around coordinated access. The first meeting was purely dedicated to introductions. And so this I am activity asks people to introduce themselves with 4 I am statements of their choice. That's really reflective of their expansive identities. And that's not something we would ordinarily do as facilitators. I think we always feel like we never have enough time and we're trying to rush through things. But as I said, this was a group of folks who did not know one another, and we felt like it was so important for the work and to get us through the challenging conversations to have that human connection. Another activity highlighted on the slide is the 9 whys. And while the framing of that might seem like, why would you ask someone a series and sequence of why, that could get someone feeling defensive, a kind of really effective use for this is having people kind of challenge themselves and really be self-critical and examine why they feel a certain way, why they might be proposing certain value statements. And we found a lot of consensus around the use of this exercise and this exploration of like, yeah, why am I saying this is important for us to abide by as a community? And so after those 10 meetings, culminating in that half-day retreat, the prioritization committee had their guiding values, which I'm not going to read, but they are here on the slide. And I'm not going to read it because I want to focus on 1 value in particular, or 2 on this slide. So you'll see one of the PC's values was prioritizing racial and ethnic groups that were overrepresented in the homeless population. And this became really an umbrella guiding principle and value for the committee in whatever assessment we were going to develop. And while that is here, and there was unanimous consensus at the retreat around this, that's not where the committee started. Initially, when we were having conversations around this, there were some sentiments, not from all members, but of some, of like, we're all people who experienced homelessness. Like, why do we need to rank one person over the other? And we were, we had shown them some data and some graphs, but I think we had front-loaded a lot of the data up front, and that didn't necessarily work. And so as they were having these challenging conversations, they made other requests of like, well, can we see the data a certain different way? Like, that might help us inform our decisions. And so I really just highlight that because I think that is such a stark example of the transformative nature of this committee and how much they were willing to learn and grow together, and also how we needed to be flexible. I think there's an assumption that folks with lived experience and data are like mutually exclusive things, and that is not the case at all. It's really on us to be thinking about why how we are using and utilizing data to inform their decisions, and they were the first group to say, like, I can speak to my experience in my community, but I also want to see the data. And they were asking for the data, and we just had to figure out, like, how do we show it in the right ways? And so once they saw the data, they felt so compelled and were like, absolutely, we see the disproportionate rates of homelessness among BIPOC communities. This needs to be a value. We see the intersectionality between the criminal legal system and the homelessness response system. This needs to be a value. But that came in time with challenging conversations. So I'm going to end this now with some of Deborah's key takeaways.
I hope to convey in this example today that it is those with lived experience who come from an array of backgrounds and experiences living unhoused who are closest to the solutions for ending homelessness. We must be included in these difficult discussions. When we arrive with all of our individual stories of trauma, emotion, exhaustion, fear, obstacles we face, anger about the situation, and our fighting spirits of resilience. All of this is informative of the reality of homelessness, the toll it is taking on people, and within this information is where the solutions lie. We can ask the hard questions and build trust when we first radically accept that people are dying, unsheltered, while there is a deficit in affordable housing options. And second, we can trust that people with lived experience have valuable contributions to the process of solving the homeless epidemic. A successful VI SPDAT redesign space is one that provides room for flexibility, a sense of calm acceptance, a diversity of lived experience perspectives, acknowledge and management of the escalation of emotions, and the skilled navigation and facilitation of meetings led by the professionals who best know what questions to ask of those living closest to the solutions.
Okay, so I think I'm at time. So I'm just going to say here is the slide with facilitation resources. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me by email, or as I said, really the true superstar, Deborah, her email is up there. And thank you. I also just want to acknowledge that in this presentation, we showed you the guiding values, but we are now at a really exciting point in our community where we have the draft assessment tool, and we are very eager to see if the prioritization committee feels like those values were met through the assessment tool. But we have more resources we can definitely share and follow up by email if you're interested. Thank you.
That's not what I wanted. How do I? How did you get it?
You don't want your speaker notes?
No.
Oh.
It's just presenter view. So we can go into, where's the cursor?
I didn't have mine on presenter mode, so I don't know why that. Oh, I see. Use presenter view. Check off.
Thank you.
It should work now.
There we go. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So Tansei, Anin, Buju, and Gui, hello. My welcome and thank you so much for coming today. My name is Tamer Linklater, and unfortunately my co-presenter Sam could not be here today, so you're stuck with me. I will be talking about how we worked as lived experienced scholars to map the homelessness and housing systems in our city, Nogo-Jawinong, Peterborough in Ontario. The project evolved over the course of the last 3 years, and most of our work together focused on research. The overall goal of the project was to explore how the homelessness and housing system is meant to work on paper versus how it is experienced by folks on the ground. We were also interested in identifying whether there are patterns in terms of people's experiences, especially where people's housing needs are or are not being met. There was another presentation about our project findings and recommendations. It was yesterday, and I really hope you attended. But this presentation is going to be focused on our overall process for working together and our creative knowledge mobilization activities. We wanted to make sure that as many folks as possible would see our work, especially local municipal leaders, managers and leaders at various local organizations, and the broader public. To share our research findings, we used some unconventional approaches, such as zines, and data poems, which I'm super excited to share with you. We also held community convening events, released reports, and are currently working on articles. But today, I really wanted to focus on the parts of our work that excited me the most as a researcher and artist. So this is our team. It's the Building from Experience Super Crew as part of the Research for Social Change Lab at Trent University. We are made up of diverse age and gender folks with various levels of experience with housing loss and housing precarity. And we started the project with a series of art workshops spread over about 2 months to build trust as a team and to map our research design. We worked with clay, India ink, paint, and did various creative writing exercises, which were my favorite. This really solidified our trust with each other and helped us handle our mental health and other challenges that came up throughout the project. So the first phase of the project was focused on how the homelessness system was supposed to work in Noko-Jiwanong. And we started with a broad internet search, looking for information on what do I do if I become homeless in Peterborough, which is literally the exact phrase I typed into Google when we started. We gathered and reviewed legislation, policies, program materials, websites, guidebooks, and various rules. We found shelters and city staff to inquire about how people access services and check to make sure that the entry points we were reading about worked. We then mapped all this information out, trying to make it all as transparent as possible, and we fact-checked our knowledge as we went along. Something that became clear very early on was that this information was not easy to navigate. This wasn't surprising for our team because many of us have had experience trying to navigate the housing services, but it made it more important for us to continue doing this work. And all of that information was compiled into our first zine, Get in Line. The title was meant to highlight how resources are not only difficult to find, but also difficult to access. Application processes are complicated, and wait times for programs are often years long. And in this zine, we explained coordinated access and broke down the various steps, outlining the process of getting a shelter bed, and we go over social assistance, or how being homeless affects the social assistance funding that people receive. So this is an example of one of the spreads in our zine. We gathered information about the local shelters and mapped how people are assigned to shelter beds, which is what the little chart is about. So a strength that we had was we tapped into our talents and hobbies to help create and disseminate our work. So 2 of us are artists, myself and Joey, and we did many of the illustrations for the zines. I am a poet and was also able to use my writing as part of this project, which I will be talking about later. So the drawings here were produced by me and Joey, and they were based on local photos of the shelters in Peterborough. So the local shelter for women fleeing violence, Crossroads, has a symbol instead of the actual building for safety reasons. I chose to draw a house being sewn back together to symbolize the strength and resilience of folks, especially when they are given the necessary access to the necessary resources to enable their healing. So this is another spread we did, and we created characters and who were experiencing housing loss, and we explained how they came to be homeless. And then we mapped how each person might be rated during the assessment process, and then explained the resources that each person might be matched to in Nogojuwanong. And we confirmed our understanding of these processes with municipal staff before we published our zine to make sure that we weren't misrepresenting how their prioritization and matching process worked in our community. And I did a bunch of mazes to highlight how complicated getting housing can be. So this is like the last spread I will share from Get In Line. And Joey drew a mini comic of Sam as the main character to portray how to access the shelter and how it feels for folks, especially all of the waiting that people experience, waiting to see if there's a free bed at the shelter, waiting to be assessed and placed on the by name priority list, and then waiting for about a year to be matched to housing. So once the Get In Line was complete and we knew how the system was designed to work, we started interviewing people. We did this to learn about how the system is actually experienced from the perspectives of people without housing who are seeking those services and those who are responsible for providing those services. We did about 90 interviews, and we used those to produce Stay In Line, which highlights people's struggles to use our local coordinated access process to secure housing, and as well as people's struggle to administer and deliver a homelessness serving system under conditions of extraordinary research scarcity. So Nogojuwanong, or Peterborough, has one of the lowest vacancy rates in the province of Ontario. So alongside our creation of Stay In Line, we made a bunch of other zines. We called the series Park Stories because many of the interviews with unhoused folks took place in local parks. And the purpose of Park Stories was to address and dispel myths and misconceptions people in our community have about homelessness. And we used direct quotes from the unhoused folks we interviewed, as well as those tasked with delivering and overseeing the homeless serving system. These zines focused on a particular subject that came up frequently in interviews or subjects that we as lived experienced folks felt was important to highlight. So this is a list of the various zines. There are physical copies here for people to look at, and they are also online. I'll be giving you the link later. Thank you. So Joey did most of the artwork, and I did a lot of the lines, because I just like lines. That was much funnier in my head. Some of the topics we explored included the impact of anti-homeless bylaws and tent evictions, the challenges of people's experience trying to keep their things safe without housing, and a deep dive into the shelter experience and why shelters are not accessible for many in our community. And then we also did a zine on how people figure out how to navigate this system. So this is my favorite part. So alongside those zines, we were like, let's just include lived experience. Let's just do another way to broadcast folks' experiences. So the zines focused on particular subjects that came up in interviews, but we wanted to amplify the voices of folks experiencing housing loss even further. So we did the data poem series, and these focus on stories of people and the challenges they face, like inaccessible services, relationship breakdowns, mental health, trauma, jail. in a very different way than we did in the zines. The zines were multiple voices we gathered together, and the poems focused on one person's voice and their story. These poems were assembled using the transcripts of the interviews we conducted to create the zines. They are a combination of blackout poetry and found poetry. So blackout poetry is taking a marker and crossing out the words so that you pick words that speak to you, and then you cross out the rest of them, and then the words that remain will form a poem out of an already existing text. And found poetry is taking that a step further and cutting apart the text and reassembling it in a way to create something new, again, out of an already existing text. So I'm going to read what's on the slide. This is called Incarcerated. Interviewer, interviewee, July 11th, 2022. Runtime, a very precarious feeling. Interviewer, interviewee, May 10th, 2022. Runtime, 34 minutes and 49 seconds. Do you consent to participate in this interview? Yes, I consent. How many times have you tried to access housing services? 2 or 3 times. I don't remember exactly what happened. It's just tricky. Dissociation is really challenging. Breakdown, crisis, not always aware of everything going on. 5 minutes. Back to the very first time you lost your housing. No longer safe for me. A very precarious feeling. Had friends, couch surfed, several places, month or 2. I don't quite remember. I couldn't sleep. Super exhausting. So this is another. In this next poem, I wanted to play with the fact that I was working with interviews and that the interviewees were sharing incredibly personal stories with us. So the blackout sections are mostly formatting choices or for privacy. So I blocked out their names, the names of organizations, or anything that could help people identify who these stories were. And then I left the length of the interview and the date to again highlight that these are life stories that were shared with us at a very specific moment in time. And then some of the interview questions were left in for clarity, and those are in italics on the slides. And after forming the poems, I did some watercolors for the backgrounds of the posters. So we're gonna post these in popular places in Nogo so all varieties of people will see them. I chose colors I liked, like purple and blue, and yellow, and I painted how working with these interviews made me feel. You'll see the purple background in a minute, but it ended up looking like birch bark, which I thought was pretty cool. In my Anishinaabe teachings, birch bark is used to make baskets and canoes. Thank you so much. So it was focused on traveling, sharing, and storing our teachings, which I felt is super significant for this project. And the blue and yellow backgrounds just looked really pretty, so I kept them. So I'm going to read this one as well, because poetry is meant to be heard as well as read. So, Incarcerated. Interviewer, July 11th, 2022. Runtime, 41 minutes and 36 seconds. There's only one for homeless shelter for youth, so if you can't get in, you're fucked. Where are you supposed to go? You can't go to the overflow shelter. I went to the transitional housing. I just didn't like the way things were run. I understand them not being able to sleep over, but you should be able to have somebody come over and play video games. I wanted out of the program. They didn't even try and talk me out of it. Did they help you find another place to live, or? No, because I was in the shelter. 40 minutes. A lot of the places when you call and you tell them that you're a young person looking for housing, tell that you're homeless, they right away snaps. Assume, oh, this person is an alcoholic or a criminal. They are technically not supposed to be allowed to discriminate because you have a criminal record, but I get why some of them do. If you have a long list of drug charges, living in all these places and selling drugs out of them, you are not going to want to move in and have somebody selling drugs in their house. But I believe everybody deserves a chance. Everybody deserves a chance. So this is the purple birch bark background that I was talking about. And one of the topics that came up frequently in our interviews that we didn't necessarily ask, it just rose from the participants talking, was how the homeless system could be improved or expanded upon. And I kept these excerpts in a separate document because I knew they were important, but I didn't know how they fit in with the existing poems that they came from. So I did some fiddling around, and I noticed that they all fit together very well. And they also empowered the voices of lived and living experience of folks. And this is the poem that came out of the excerpts. Oh, what we need, straight from the streets. There's a place out in BC, I think, that abolished homelessness. If a whole town can do that, why can't we? What's going on here that it's not working? What do we need? I think more supports, more people in the community to help, a lot more communication, a lot more focus around affordable housing. People that have messaged on Kijiji and stuff, they won't accept you unless you're a student or an elder. Landlords are, all gung-ho for ODSP or OW because they know that they're going to get their rent. But anybody who I've emailed, they won't take you if you're on social assistance. There needs to be like a house you can go to where you relearn how to do things over again, where you can reintegrate into society. It's hard getting a job and not having anywhere to go. Anything else you think that we need on the record, like what young people need these days to feel safe? More housing people, like housing workers. I have a housing worker, but that's only because I'm still a youth. So to conclude, our project wasn't overly academically conventional, although we did and are producing reports, articles, community and conference presentations, like this one I just gave. It was based on centering lived experience, art, and co-creating accessible knowledge mobilization efforts. We used our team's interests, hobbies, and talents to really emphasize and project the voices of people who are currently experiencing housing loss. We worked with great care and empathy together to produce a series of work that we are incredibly proud of. All the zines and poems can be found at the link, socialchangelab.ca, and there's also physical copies with QR codes for folks who are interested. Miigwech and Ekose, thank you for listening.
No, I want my coffee. I'm freezing. It's cold. Well, how do you follow that? Yeah. I think that's kind of unfair, to be honest. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge how rare it is to see that kind of knowledge mobilization coming out of academic work. And so to yourselves and to the research lab, like, kudos. That is super impressive and a struggle to make that happen. I don't know how. It's impressive anyway.
Are you standing? Or are you
I'm standing.
You're standing? Okay. I'll sit.
If I sit, no one can see me. So this way you've got a chance at least of seeing me. You ready?
Yeah, I'm gonna sit. Is that okay, or is that
You'll sit?
weird?
Okay, no, whatever.
Okay.
It's not a super formal room, I'm thinking, so I think we'll be okay. My name is Carrie Rempel. Annika put these slides together. Annika, saying lead researcher, but that's kind of not really how it worked in our project. And we'll talk more about that. And it says associate dean. I'm having trouble with that. That's a recent position. I still think of myself as just as a professor. So.
But you're not. You're,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Annika. I came to this project initially as a student researcher. I'm a business student, and I was interested in learning more about utilizing lived and living experience voices. I'd been recently nerding out about tax policy and realizing how crazy it is that a room full of all people that look the same get to decide what every vastly diverse member of the population pays and when they pay it and how they pay it. Anyways, I met Carrie and expressed my interest in lived and living experience, taking part in tax policy decisions and change. And she mentioned there was the possibility of this project happening. And I just would like to say this is not a tax policy project. You did not come to the wrong presentation. If you're all about to get up and leave, I understand. Anyways, what was I saying? I had gotten to know Carrie a bit more through chatting about the potential project. And eventually she somehow pulled it out of me that I had also had lived experience with homelessness, which is something I did not share freely at that time. I'm going to read this part just because it is still something that is hard to share, I guess. But I had spent many years trying to separate myself from who I was and built a wall between me and that life that I had lived. I had been pretty sick of feeling like a victim and treated like I was vulnerable. And I just want to say that the presentations that I feel so privileged to have witnessed yesterday, I wish I'd seen them when I was scared and cold and alone teenager. I wish someone had told me that my experience made me powerful, not a victim. A member on the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network said yesterday, I share my story so you can see my power. And that is something that I will forever carry with me to remind myself that I too belong at this table, which is something I have to do often. Thank you. So I think also there is a learning experience to be taken from this, that despite the fact I had recognized how valuable lived experience voices could be, I was still unable to see the value in my own lived experience. When upon reflection, it was the experience that I have lived that have given me the skills to be able to recognize what needs to be done to create change. So, moving on to something a little bit brighter, introducing our amazing project community that made everything happen. The project was born from several community conversations. Members of the Research and Steering Committee had worked alongside the Kelowna Lived Experience Circle called LECO. As the work with LECO progressed, they wondered if this was a model that could be used by other communities. So our steering committee comprised of the City of Penticton, mainly Jamie Lloyd-Smith, who was here presenting on 2 different presentations. And she was a very active member of the steering committee and a funder, or not her, but City of Penticton, sorry. United Way BC, who created a collective called 100 More Homes that has a 3-year MOU with the City of Penticton regarding collaboration around homelessness and non-market housing planning. Ask Wellness, that is a nonprofit that provides housing and wraparound supports. And although I have Vancouver Foundation under the steering committee, they were just one of the funders. And then our research team comprised of 5 members, 3 lived experience co-researchers and 2 researchers with experience in community engaged research. My personal favorite thing about our researcher team was how diverse it was. So every lived experience researcher came to the table with vastly different experience. Bobby is a service provider, Sean a service user, both within the community of Penticton. And my lived experience comes from my youth, as I spoke about, and a completely different community. And additionally, our two community researchers, Carrie and Steph, who also cannot be here today, came from two very different faculties of the college. Carrie from business and a plethora of nonprofit work and work within the community, and Steph from psychology and also very embedded in that Penticton community. And all of these unique perspectives and experiences gave our team an incredible bank of knowledge and skills to pull from when building and conducting our research process. So after putting together this rockstar team, this is what we set out to study. Could a lived or living experience circle help address homelessness in Penticton and ultimately other communities, hopefully?
Okay, so our work actually started many, many years ago, not just over the last year where the actual project took place. So it started when we started to research how a lived experience or lived and living experience circle could actually support a whole community. And that was done and embedded into Kelowna's Journey Home plan. So they created a task force which included, right in the decision-making process, a lived experience circle. And having been involved in that from the very beginning and working with that team quite closely, we really did feel it was a model that would benefit other communities, in particular rural or urban, which is a new word for me, urban, which is you're too big to be rural and too small to be urban. You're like the middle sister that no one wants to talk to. So especially for those size communities where access to resources like you might get from reaching home are not there. And communities tend to work more collaboratively together. The other thing I want to highlight is that, like these projects here, lived experience in this project led. And we're involved in every single aspect from the very start of determining the question, research design, all the way through data collection. They facilitated the sessions. We co-facilitated together the sessions. We did analysis together and we wrote together. So involved in every step, which is not my normal experience with academic research. So that's, for me, is the only way that I can work, but I know that that's not the norm. So we did all of the normal research things, though, that you're supposed to do. We did a literature review. We interviewed the Kelowna Lived Experience Circle. And our main data collection was focus groups created with stakeholders in the community, so service providers, and we put them into separate sessions. So we had lived experience folks that joined us to do sessions, and then we had service providers in a separate session. Oh, and we created technical and community reports, which we have
Thank you.
here for you today, which we're happy to sign. If you'd like signed copies.
Very good copy.
But they're here, the outputs are meant, again, that knowledge mobilization is meant to support community. It's not meant to support the academic realm.
Is there a PDF version of that?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, and we have a QR code. Look at this team up here. We've never met yet. We work seamlessly as a collective. Yeah, so you can scan, it'll take you to the Kelowna Homelessness Research Collaborative, which is just where we tend to store our stuff.
Oh, no.
This is me. So I feel like most of you in this room probably already have a general idea of why communities should include lived and living experience voices. I mean, based on the presentations I've seen so far, granted you were all at those same sessions, there has been a pretty strong case made for it. Even if you didn't attend a single lived experience session, I remember when I was first introduced to the idea of the inclusion of lived experience voices in decision making, and it was just like, oh yeah, duh, that seems pretty obvious. Why would we let someone make decisions that affect our lives that has absolutely zero idea what it is like to live it? So, that being said, I am going to give you a breakdown of what specific things that surfaced when conducting our 2 focus groups for this specific community. These were things that each group felt the community of Penticton could benefit from having a lived and living experience circle. So that was something that came up for us when we interviewed the Kelowna LECO group versus doing the focus groups, is even though they're only 45 minutes apart, both communities had very different ideas of what those circles looked like. So I think it's a super important thing to remember when you go back to your communities, is that we give you these tools, we give you these principles and ideas, but you really need to understand first what the community needs before implementing those. So when conducting the lived experience focus group, there was an overwhelming need that came from them for a systems change that was grounded in the experience of the people who the system is supposed to be helping. Whereas with the community focus group, they expressed the desire to have the ability to make decisions that are grounded in reality and overall how this creates a better environment for providing support. Advocacy was prominent in both sessions, but in different ways. So for lived experience, it was very action-focused, going out and getting things done in the community. But for service providers, it looked more like providing guidance or counsel to decision makers. Addressing stigma was the same. Both groups agreed it was important, but for lived experience, they wanted to address stigma in a way that would allow more compassion for their community, whereas service providers saw it as an opportunity to educate community members and provide more resources for the wider community.
Okay, so our presentation is supposed to be about the engagement matrix that we created. And as we did our literature review, both for work we did with LECO, but also for this project, there is lots of information out there, and our technical report, no, maybe it's our toolkit, has lots of links to how to run a lived or living experience circle, what kinds of things you could consider. But one of the pieces we saw that was missing was, don't really talk about how do you actually involve that lived or living experience circle in the work that you do. So we wanted to highlight, when you think about engagement, that you want to consider how you're engaging and the types of engagement that you're doing. And so we created a matrix that has 2 dimensions to it. The vertical dimension looks at things like the resources that you'll need, but also talks about the skills and supports that you'll need to provide as a community if you're wanting to do this, to engage with a lived experience circle. But it also talks about what should be expected on both parties. So it's the engagement matrix is helping to identify what kinds of things do you need to think about if you're the community, and what kinds of things do you need to think about if you're the lived and living experience circle, to make sure that you're asking for the right supports and planning for the right kinds of resources. So along the top, you can see it says consultation. We can move to the next slide too. Consultation, involvement, and engagement were along the top. And so we tried to use, this is derived from, if you are familiar with engagement, kinds of other ways of talking about engagement, the IAP2. This is an abridged version of that. It's shorter because it's only got 3 pieces to it. It makes it easy to implement in community. So you can think of light engagement as being consultation, medium level engagement as we've called involvement, and deep engagement is engagement. I know, confusing words. So when you're thinking about how you want to work with a lived and living experience, or how they want to be worked with, when you're thinking about consultation, that light engagement, what we're really trying to highlight is that those kinds of interactions with the lived or living experience circle are short, episodic. They're meant probably to be giving information, or for the circle to be able to provide feedback to a question or a community suggestion. It requires the least amount of resources, and the input from the lived experience circle may have no impact on the decision. So that's kind of like you're setting up expectations that there's not necessarily any expectation that this feedback that they're giving is going to be implemented. But when you move to that medium level, when you move to involvement, now we're starting to build deeper relationships. So there needs to be some expectation of collaboration and interaction. These kinds of engagements are looking to do validation. There should be multiple interactions, more resources are required, and then when you get to engagement, you're really looking at deep. These things take a long time, you're doing significant work together, and you need to expect to be able to provide resources and be able to facilitate the skills that are needed. So some of those additional skills outside of the normal resources that we showed you on that previous slide, it's thinking about the skills and training that are going to be required. We need to make sure that the lived experience circle has all of the tools and the ability to use the tools that they need. So talking about data, that's one of them. It's hard to look at data if people don't have the glasses that they might need as I'm growing older to read fine print, or if they don't have the technical tools that are there, if they don't know how to pull things up on their email, if they don't have things like sufficient Wi-Fi or access to data plans. So you always want to be thinking about the technology, and you also want to think about the administrative structure. So how are lived and living experiences as circles supported? So what kind of coordinated support can you provide to them so that all of that management of the time, of the organization, of the gathering resources is not on them? How do you help them to be free to just do what they need to do?
And our matrix, the actual matrix in the books, is much more detailed, just a heads up. It's not a pretty little thing like that. I'm very proud of it, though. Okay, so now we will break down how the matrix can be utilized by lived and living experience circles and the community, and how it can support them. So starting with lived and living experience circles, the matrix allows the group to be able to analyze a request that may come across their table and understand what level of engagement that it may take for them to complete it. And whether or not they have the capacity for that at that moment, or even if it is something that would be a good fit for that group to complete. If this request seems to exceed their capacity or resources, they can look at additional things like what kind of relationship they may have with the community group that is asking for the request. Would that group provide them with additional support they may need to either complete their prioritized work or defer it until later? Additionally, looking at what the final outputs may be, they can decide whether this is a request that may need to be prioritized.
And for communities, they can think about, this matrix can help them to find a common language to express what it is that they're needing or what they're looking for. So it can help them to use terms that are commonly understood by both groups. It helps to set clear expectations using this matrix. It can identify the necessary resources so you can plan and budget for that, both for people and for time. And it helps to understand the levels of commitment that are needed. And I think that one's the most important. When we, and this is maybe an experience shared by many of you, one of the most common frustrations is you come and you ask us for our feedback, and then nothing happens. There is no follow-up. There is no coming back to say, how did that change based on what we said? What was the impact of our work? That came through loud and clear in talking with both the Kelowna group and then with the residents of Penticton. So I really want to make sure that that's understood, that understanding those levels of commitment with that engagement are so important. Okay, so where do we go from here? Some of our next steps is looking for partnerships with other communities. So we're open for business. But we've also talked with a group out of Selkirk College, and they actually have some students working on a project in their communities to be able to see if they can incorporate a lived experience circle that's going to support a smaller rural community. So that's exciting.
Yes, so if any of your communities are looking to partner that would be willing to test out the matrix with their either current or hopefully to be lived and living experience circles, we're hoping to do further research as well once we pilot and test it to develop it further and support those communities.
And then based on that work, we want to write some case studies so you can hear how it worked or didn't work.
And finally, we'd like to look for new directions to take this research and hopefully continue the work that we have started. So please don't forget to come up and either QR code your way to our reports or grab a copy if there's some still available. I mean, they're hot topic. Yes, so. And if that's too much commitment or you're sold already and want to just come and partner with us, Carrie's email is right up there. Thank you all for listening to us ramble on. Well, mostly me ramble on, but mostly for being here and doing what you all do. This has been an incredibly inspiring experience to witness and take part in a conference that has so much hope and strength. So thank you all.
Portable mic.
Hi, great presentations, all of you. I have a question regarding, okay, so I see you find people with lived experience through outreach, posters, postcards, emails, and then you assist people's participation in lived experience, like advisory committees, steering committees, work through whatever's necessary, like translation and tech support and training. But I come across people sometimes, they started school when they were 5, they stayed till they were 16, and they still can't read. And they ended up in precarious employment and precarious housing and homelessness. And I imagine it's hard to reach out to people like that, but they should be encouraged to participate. They have very unique needs. And if any of you know anybody who's doing that kind of outreach, I'd really love to hear about it. In the course of my work, I recently came across 2 such people, and like just by luck, I have a friend that works in the field, and both of these individuals were plugged in with like all kinds of agencies because they had multiple issues. They had health issues, they had drug issues, they were homeless. And I told both of them about Frontier College, which is nearby and it's free and it will teach them to read. And both of them were astounded and demanding to know from me, how come no one ever told me about this before? Like, shit, man, I don't know, somebody should have. But is there any awareness of this out there? Is anybody trying? That's my question.
You know, one of the things one of many things that post-secondary doesn't do well is let people know what they have and to make themselves accessible in the general community. So we kind of suck at that, I gotta be honest. But I think some institutions are getting better, but it's what I'm gonna encourage every researcher who works in a post-secondary to think about is how are we changing the way that we go and do work in community and not on community. And so being involved, one of the ways that we get at Okanagan College, so we work with Project Literacy in town that helps to identify folks that have literacy issues who haven't completed their education. We work with partner agencies in the community to be able to refer people to, but we're still an institution that is or doesn't feel welcoming. And we found that with our research. We thought we were being super sensitive, and we booked our community, our lived experience engagements at one of the local churches that's known for hosting events. And the participants there were like, how come you didn't have this at the college where you had your other sessions? And we're like, because we thought it was a more welcoming environment, but we realized you learn something every time you do one of these projects and in every different community, that the more that we can make those spaces, those institutional spaces welcoming, the more opportunities that we have, the more that folks who don't think it's an opportunity to be in those spaces will know that they're welcome. And I truly believe that they are welcome in our post-secondary spaces, but if we don't connect, no one's going to find out about it. But I'd also ask the service providers to reach out. Like, if there's something that you're missing, reach out to your local institutions to find out what's there. And together, we're going to be able to help support. But we need the service providers to know that there is opportunity.
So I can speak a little to like how we did this at the Social Change Lab. We went straight to the shelters for like youth and the Olivera shelters, and we sat with youth and we talked to them, and then we did a formal interview. And then after we did the initial artwork, we spent another like couple of months, and we sat down together and we went through the websites, we did the like training together for ethics. And then every single week we met, and at the beginning of our sessions, we would talk about like things we were struggling with, or things that we needed, or things that we like needed help with, and then we'd to get together and like brainstorm different tools and things. We'd be like, oh, have you heard of this organization that will help you with this? Or I can take you, like, let's call the social worker right now and you can ask, and this is what you need to ask. And then we had like a group chat, and we talk like every single day. It could be like something super light as, look at this super funny GIF I have, but there could also be like, hey, I don't have any money for groceries this week. Can you come help me? And we did that every single week. That's something we connected to together. And like one of the people in our team is currently in jail, and we've been emailing and talking, and like we're in regular communication. And then we helped another team member get into they're completing their GED, and we sat with them and we're like, hey, it's who you call. Do you want us to help you with this? And we worked together one-on-one, which I realize is not the super conventional way of doing things. And that's mostly because Naomi is awesome. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Did we have a question up front?
Yes.
Hi, sorry. Hi, so my name's Shakira Grant. I'm based in Nova Scotia, have ancestral ties to two of over 50 historic African Nova Scotian communities in the province. And I think you kind of spoke actually to the question I was going to ask, but I'm curious about aftercare, like after you engage with folks with lived experience, until the benefit is felt by those people, it is extractive by nature. Research is extractive. And so you just kind of spoke to it, but I was interested to know, what are some of the strategies you have to support the people that are being engaged once you get the information you need after that piece has been done?
So again, like I said, for the group, we had those chats, we had the weekly check-ins, but for other folks, like I personally carry like a little well-being kit around with me, and I'll hand them out to folks. Or like a lot of the people we interviewed, some of us had like direct relationships with, so we knew them like before. Like we were social worker, not me specifically, but other members were like social workers, and they knew people, and then really see them in the community, because like we didn't just stay at the university. We went out and we do things collectively, and we try to give them our contact information and talk to them. So I hope that answers.
And I think sometimes there are boundaries that I'm not sure what we do with. So I'm not trained to be able to support some kinds of needs. I can connect people to the resources that I know that are available, but there's a fear of doing harm in some cases where you're engaging in supporting someone when maybe you're not supporting them in a way that's appropriate. So there are individual barriers sometimes for research teams, but I think the more that we focus on research opportunities that are not one-offs, so where you have a continual engagement in the community. So one of our researchers, our co-researchers, we probably email once or twice a week still, and we look for opportunities to bring him in on other work. For him, that's therapy. And it's something that helps him to move through the day-to-day challenges. But there are, one of the biggest struggles, I think, is knowing that I can't influence the system. I can't get him access to housing any faster. And I can't make promises because that's not fair either. It's a, like you said, it's an extractive process, and there is an element while you're connected, you're still removed because we aren't service providers, and there's a benefit to us because we can ask questions that a service provider can't ask, but that also means we have the limitations of not being able to support like a service provider can support.
So I had a couple of quick ones. I've noticed that when they say compensation, there doesn't seem to be a standard. So, for example, when I worked at a homeless encampment as a volunteer, they asked people all these questions that were very invasive. And then they gave them a $10 gift card. I'm like, you just asked them to traumatize themselves and all you gave them was a $10 gift card to Tim Hortons? Like, what? So like they could bargain a sandwich, so their trauma is worth a sandwich?
Yeah.
Like what? Another thing I've noticed is, so I was wondering if there's work to standardize. What do we say compensation for unhoused folks? This is what we mean. This is the amount that is acceptable. Don't get the pittance. Thankfully, a lot of the homelessness shelters, like, I've never had to use them, thank goodness. But if I did, I couldn't. Many of our houseless neighbors have disabilities and they can't access the shelter because they need care. So is there places in BC, because I know there aren't here, that if you go to a homeless shelter and you have a disability that requires supports, is there a shelter for those folks? Or do they just die, I guess? And thirdly, just in terms of food shelters, are there places for disabled women to go if they're escaping violence? Because right now, none of our homes, none of our shelters even have ramps. So I feel like we're getting forgotten about. Lastly, did any of you look at the impacts of disability on these other types of marginalized groups? Yeah, sorry, that was a lot.
But so eloquent and pretty brilliant and very pointed. So there's a couple of things that we can address right away from our perspective, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel. Just with compensation, I don't think there's a standardization, and there are a couple of very bad reasons for that. One is that cost of living in every community looks different. So to standardize could be marginalizing one community over another. So I would hope that it's reflective of what a living wage would be in the community that you're doing the work in.
Couldn't we just make that a standard?
There's no agreement on that, though. So again, like I said it's not a good reason. So you want to have some open flexibility. The other thing is funders. And funders sometimes put limitations on us. So the more that we can challenge funders to consider these topics and think about the limitations that they put. And what I wanted to add on to your point was the gift cards. People don't want gift cards. They would like to be able to determine where their funds are going to be allocated to, just like anybody who is being compensated for the work that they do. So we've been able to terrorize our administration into allowing us to give out cash. And I do say terrorize because that wasn't an easy fight. we've had help in getting there, but it's not just the amount, it's how. So, I mean, I get compensated with coffee cards sometimes, but it's a different scenario. So I think that's really important. The disability question is, I think that shelters do what they can, but until shelter rules and regulations require a shift in practice and design, we are not going to see it happen, and I am so sorry that that's the case. Because I don't know where they get the resources sometimes. But if it's built into the design and the requirements, they have to do that. And
How do we push our government to do that?
continue to do what you're doing right now, which is to speak up and make other people feel uncomfortable about the choices that they're making or not making.
So I just want to remind everybody, we have about 5 minutes to go in the session. We want to get you to lunch on time. So we have 2 more questions, and we'll have to cut it off.
So I want to say thank you to all the presenters. Wonderful, amazing stuff. And Tamara, I'm in Hamilton, and actually we've used your zines before to inspire some of how we want to visualize our work, so thank you so much for that. It's having an impact already outside of what you probably intended. My question is for Nicole, though. So I'm really curious about, what did prioritization look like before this process? Was it purely based on the VI SPDAT and like the scores that people would have? Or did you have priority categories that then were adjusted based on the process you went through? Because I'm kind of curious about where it started and then changed.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's right. So we were largely using, so we would use the VI SPDAT, and then based on that, there were some tiebreaker conditions to differentiate if someone had the same like acuity score through the VI SPDAT. So, disability status, length of time homeless would be tiebreakers, but that is how it was prioritized. And then in terms of with redesign, so we have just gotten to the point where we have the draft assessment questions now. And so our next steps are going to be a beta and a pilot phase, and that's really where we're going to have to be monitoring and adjusting where those prioritization and weighting schemes are going to be. So it could look potentially very different, and communities we looked to have done all sorts of things where they have a set allocation of, okay, we're going to always prioritize family composition, or we have a set aside for DV survivors and where their score is going to be. So we have some frameworks, but we really want to make sure it's grounded in our local context, and we're not exacerbating inequities, just saying like, it's not the VI SPDAT, but we need it to be better. So thank you.
Hi, thank you. You guys are really inspiring. I'm from Halifax, Chibouctouc. I'm a lived experience participant. Curious if there's anybody from the municipal or provincial government here right now. Raise your hand. Hi. I don't know if this is a question or an observation, but I'm curious how First Voice participants are engaged in the process of developing policies, procedures, et cetera, and how we ensure that people aren't just trotted out to show the news media or whoever that the government has engaged in community consultation and stakeholder involvement. I really, truly believe that a lot of what happens is that people are invited to sit down at the table, and then that's the end of it. Nothing happens after that. There's no actual, the input is not implemented, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I guess for you guys that are developing toolkits for people to use to try to engage First Voice participants more often, is that also in have you worked that into your matrix or?
In parts around that intentionality. And it's probably written in a few spots, is that there needs to be, well, it's about intentionality. If you're not intending to use the advice, don't come and get it. I hope comes through clearly in the toolkits. It's also a key principle of research, by the way. You don't ask questions that you don't intend to do something with. So all of those things kind of align. In some communities, what we do see is that when they have advocates in the community levels of government, they can build things into the process for decision-making. So one of the key things is to start to get those first-person or lived experience voices onto decision-making bodies. And then ensuring that there are advocates alongside in those decision-making bodies that recognize their voice as being valuable, and trying to prioritize that. Yeah.
Sorry, is that we're at time?
Thank you.
No, that, oh.
Oh, did you want to take a
Thank
picture
you
with
to
this slide?
everybody. Enjoy your lunch.
Go closer.